Henderson County, Illinois, July 12, 1944, 0545 hours. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Kramer stands at the edge of a cornfield watching the morning sun rise over farmland that stretches to the horizon in every direction, and he cannot reconcile what he sees with everything the Reich told him about the primitive, inefficient American agricultural system that barely feeds its own population. Kramer, a farmer's son from Westphalia captured at Anzio, has spent the last month expecting to find American farms operating with methods his grandfather would recognize: hand labor, animal power, subsistence production barely adequate for survival. What Kramer cannot possibly know, what no German farmer could imagine even in their most optimistic dreams, is that within hours, he will witness a single American farmer using mechanical equipment to accomplish in one day what would require 20 German farm workers an entire week to complete. And within days, his understanding of agricultural economics, rural prosperity, and the relationship between farming and national power will be fundamentally transformed as he confronts a reality so abundant, so mechanized, so incomprehensibly productive that it will force him to question everything Nazi propaganda taught him about American weakness and German agricultural superiority. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The German military's confidence in their understanding of American agriculture comes from Reich food estate reports, from propaganda films showing Depression-era dust bowls and bread lines, from the certainty that Germany's scientific farming methods and careful resource management represent agricultural efficiency that decadent democracies cannot match. Feldwebel Ernst Becker, assigned to a farm labor program near Scottsbluff, Nebraska, has internalized the Nazi narrative about American farming: chaotic, wasteful, dependent on exploited migrant labor, producing inferior crops through mining soil fertility rather than maintaining it scientifically. He expects to find farms struggling under wartime conditions, lacking labor and equipment, barely maintaining production, while German agricultural science keeps the Reich fed despite the Allied blockade. The Nazi propaganda machine has spent years preparing German soldiers for every aspect of American life except the reality they will actually encounter. Gefreiter Hans Volker, arriving at a dairy farm near Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, expects conditions similar to the collectivized farms he has heard about from soldiers who fought in Russia: inefficient, poorly managed, producing minimal yields through brute force rather than scientific method. The mental image that Wehrmacht briefings create focuses on American agricultural backwardness: small inefficient farms operated by ignorant peasants, a countryside depopulated by migration to cities, and food production barely adequate for domestic needs. Nothing in his ideological framework prepares him for the mechanized abundance he is about to witness. What makes July 1944 different from any previous agricultural labor program is not immediately apparent to the German prisoners being transported from camps to farms across the American Midwest. Unteroffizier Carl Schmidt, watching the Illinois countryside pass by the truck window, notes the obvious prosperity: painted barns, substantial farmhouses, paved roads connecting every property, but assumes this represents wealthy estate owners rather than typical farmers. The processing at Camp Ellis before farm assignment seemed almost apologetic: American officers explaining work conditions, guaranteeing fair treatment, emphasizing that prisoners will receive the same meals as the farm families they work for. Schmidt interprets this as evidence that Americans fear prisoner resistance, not understanding that it reflects American commitment to Geneva Convention standards and practical recognition that well-fed workers produce better results. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The development of the POW farm labor program represents one of the most pragmatic solutions to wartime agricultural labor shortages in American history, born from desperate need to maintain food production while millions of farm workers serve in the military or work in defense industries. Secretary of Agriculture Claude Wickard, confronting predictions of catastrophic harvest losses in 1943, worked with the War Department to establish protocols allowing German POWs to work on American farms under strict supervision. The program required careful coordination between military authorities, state agricultural extension services, and individual farmers willing to employ enemy prisoners, a logistical challenge that American bureaucracy solved with characteristic efficiency. The farms themselves represent an investment in agricultural infrastructure that German prisoners cannot comprehend. The Jorgensen family farm near Ames, Iowa, where Oberstfreiter Ludwig Meyer is assigned, operates 640 acres using equipment that would be impossible to acquire in wartime Germany: a John Deere Model A tractor, a McCormick Deering combine harvester, a corn picker, and various implements that transform farming from manual labor into mechanized production. The equipment alone represents an investment exceeding $15,000, more than a German farmer could expect to earn in a lifetime, reflecting capital availability and agricultural prosperity that Nazi economic theory insisted was impossible under democratic capitalism. The first morning of farm work becomes a revelation that shatters preconceptions about American agriculture. Gefreiter Otto Neumann, assigned to the Henderson farm near Galesburg, Illinois, expects to begin work with hand tools, hoes, scythes, manual labor in fields worked by animal power. Instead, farmer James Henderson directs him to climb aboard a tractor pulling a hay baler, explaining the mechanical operation that will allow them to bale an entire 40-acre hayfield before noon. Neumann, whose family farm in Bavaria uses horse-drawn equipment and hand labor for everything, watches in amazement as the tractor, running on gasoline that would be unobtainable in Germany, pulls machinery that cuts, gathers, compresses, and ties hay into perfectly uniform bales without human effort beyond steering and occasional adjustments. The American commitment to agricultural mechanization represents a fundamental difference in economic philosophy that German prisoners slowly begin to understand. Feldwebel Anton Weber, working on a wheat farm near Great Bend, Kansas, calculates that the combine harvester he operates in a single 10-hour shift harvests more grain than his entire village in Germany could harvest in a week using traditional methods. The machine cuts the wheat, threshes the grain, separates the chaff, and delivers clean wheat into trucks that transport it directly to grain elevators, an integrated system that eliminates dozens of labor-intensive steps that German farming still requires. Weber, trained to believe that German engineering represents world leadership in all technical fields, cannot understand how Americans developed agricultural machinery so superior to anything available in Europe. The meals provided to prisoners working on farms deliver the most immediate and undeniable evidence of American agricultural abundance. Oberstfreiter Friedrich Schultz, eating lunch with the Wagner family near Marshalltown, Iowa, receives a plate containing fried chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, fresh corn on the cob, green beans, homemade bread with butter, and apple pie, a meal representing more meat, dairy, and fresh produce than his family in Germany consumes in a week. Mrs. Wagner serves this meal casually, as though feeding hired help such abundance is completely normal, even offering seconds when Schultz hesitates to take more. The farm dog receives table scraps containing more meat than many German families see in days, a casual waste that simultaneously appalls and astounds the German prisoners. The American farmer's relationship with government agencies creates confusion for prisoners expecting either chaotic individualism or totalitarian control. Gefreiter Paul Richter, listening to farmer Robert Morrison discuss crop insurance, price supports, and agricultural extension services near Cedar Rapids, Iowa, realizes that American farmers receive government support that is both generous and voluntary, a combination Nazi economic theory insisted was impossible. Morrison complains freely about some policies while praising others, participating in government programs he finds beneficial while ignoring those he considers intrusive, demonstrating a relationship between citizen and state that German prisoners have never experienced. The county agricultural agent visits regularly, offering advice on soil conservation and crop rotation without any coercive authority, treating Morrison as a professional colleague rather than a subject to be commanded. The living conditions of American farm families shock prisoners expecting rural poverty and backwardness. Underofficer Martin Hoffman, billeted in a small room at the Peterson farm near Sioux City, Iowa, discovers that this working farm family, not wealthy landowners but ordinary farmers, lives in a house with electricity, indoor plumbing, central heating, a telephone, a radio, and a refrigerator. The Petersons own an automobile for personal use separate from farm vehicles, take a weekly newspaper, and subscribe to agricultural magazines. Their teenage daughter attends high school in town, planning to attend Iowa State College after graduation, educational opportunities that would be reserved for elite families in Germany. The casual assumption that ordinary farm families deserve modern conveniences and educational opportunities contradicts everything Nazi ideology taught about American class exploitation. The mechanization extends beyond field equipment to every aspect of farm operations in ways that seem almost fantastical to German prisoners. Oberstfreiter Johann Fischer, assigned to a dairy operation near Madison, Wisconsin, watches electric milking machines handle 60 cows in the time it would take German dairymen to hand milk 15. The milk flows directly into refrigerated tanks, then into refrigerated trucks that transport it to processing plants where it is pasteurized, homogenized, bottled, and distributed, an integrated cold chain that ensures quality while eliminating the spoilage that plagues German dairy production. Fischer, whose brother operates a small dairy in Bavaria using methods unchanged since their grandfather's time, cannot comprehend the capital investment and technical sophistication required to create such a system. The casual discussion of agricultural science among American farmers reveals another unexpected dimension of rural American society. Feldwebel Klaus Dietrich, working for the Anderson family near Ames, Iowa, listens as farmer Thomas Anderson discusses hybrid corn varieties with his neighbor, comparing yields, disease resistance, and optimal planting densities using terminology that would not be out of place at an agricultural research institute. Anderson subscribes to farming journals, attends winter extension courses at Iowa State College, and experiments with new cultivation techniques on portions of his land, approaching farming as applied science rather than traditional practice. This integration of education and practice contradicts Nazi propaganda about American anti-intellectualism and agricultural backwardness. The economic arrangements surrounding farm labor demonstrate American prosperity in ways that confuse prisoners trained to expect exploitation. Gefreiter Ernst Koch, earning 80 cents per day in camp scrip for his farm work near Peoria, Illinois, realizes that American farm laborers, when available, earn $5 to $8 per day plus meals and often housing. Farmer David Miller explains apologetically that he would prefer to hire American workers but cannot find anyone willing to do agricultural labor when defense industry jobs pay $10 to $15 per day. The labor shortage that necessitates using POWs reflects an economy so prosperous that farming, the occupation Nazi ideology elevated as the backbone of racial health, cannot compete for workers against industrial employment. This inversion of the rural-urban relationship that Nazi blood and soil mythology insisted upon forces prisoners to question fundamental assumptions about social organization. The treatment prisoners receive from farm families creates personal relationships that challenge racial ideology more effectively than any propaganda. Oberstfreiter Heinrich Muller, working for the Jensen family near Mason City, Iowa, finds himself eating meals with the family, discussing farming practices, sharing stories about their respective childhoods, interactions that humanize the enemy in ways Wehrmacht indoctrination never anticipated. Jensen's son serves in the Pacific with the Marines, yet the family treats Muller with kindness rather than hostility, apparently able to separate the individual from the nation's politics. Mrs. Jensen even teaches Muller some English phrases and asks him to teach her teenage daughter a few German words for a school project, a cultural exchange that would be inconceivable in Nazi-occupied Europe. The agricultural abundance that prisoners witness daily accumulates into a devastating critique of Nazi economic management. Feldwebel Gustav Wagner, working harvest season near Lincoln, Nebraska, watches as grain elevators receive wheat in quantities that would feed entire German cities, stacked in concrete silos that stretch stories high, stored under conditions that prevent spoilage while waiting for transport to mills, breweries, and export facilities. The casual abundance, grain stored because there is too much to process immediately, contrasts sharply with the rationing system in Germany where every kernel matters. Wagner calculates that the wheat from a single Nebraska county exceeds the total production of several German agricultural districts, yet American farmers complain about low prices caused by overproduction. The relationship between American agriculture and military power gradually becomes apparent to prisoners who understand logistics. Oberstfreiter Wolfgang Schneider, observing the rail system that transports agricultural products near Fort Dodge, Iowa, realizes that American food production represents a strategic weapon as important as tanks or aircraft. the ability to feed not only America's civilian population and military forces but also allied nations and even enemy prisoners demonstrates a productive capacity that explains how America can sustain a two-ocean war while maintaining civilian prosperity. The cornfields of Iowa and the wheat fields of Kansas, worked by farmers using mechanized equipment and scientific methods, produce the calories that fuel the armies conquering Europe and the Pacific, a connection between agricultural and military power that Nazi planners apparently never understood. The seasonal rhythm of American farm work exposes prisoners to the complete agricultural cycle in ways that deepen their understanding. Gefreiter Karl Bauer, working on the Schmidt farm near Davenport, Iowa, participates in spring planting, summer cultivation, and fall harvest, observing how American farmers integrate mechanization, chemistry, and scientific planning to maximize yields. Schmidt uses commercial fertilizers that would be unobtainable in Germany, plants hybrid seed varieties developed by agricultural research programs, and follows crop rotation patterns recommended by university agronomists, approaching farming as a science-based business rather than traditional practice. The sophistication surprises Bauer, who expected American farmers to be ignorant peasants rather than educated professionals managing complex operations. The discussions among prisoners working on different farms reveal the consistency of what they are witnessing across the entire region. Underoffizier Franz Lehmann, comparing notes with other prisoners during transport back to camp, discovers that the mechanization, abundance, and prosperity he observes are not exceptional but typical of American agriculture. Whether in Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Kansas, or Nebraska, German POWs encounter the same pattern: large mechanized farms operated by educated farmers producing surpluses that challenge everything they learned about American agricultural weakness. The systematic nature of what they witness makes it impossible to dismiss as isolated examples or propaganda demonstrations. This is simply how American farming operates. The educational effect proves more powerful than any formal re-education program because it arises from direct observation rather than ideological instruction. Oberstfreiter Otto Klein, writing to his wife from Camp Ellis, letters carefully worded to pass censorship, describes American farms in terms that sound almost fantastical: mechanization that seems impossible given wartime shortages, abundance that contradicts reports of American economic strain, prosperity that seems incompatible with fighting a global war. His wife's responses, when they arrive weeks later, describe conditions in Germany that make his observations even more striking: food rationing that provides barely adequate nutrition, farms stripped of machinery and horses for military use, agricultural production declining while the regime promises victory through willpower rather than productive capacity. The autumn harvest of 1944 provides the most dramatic demonstration of American agricultural capability as prisoners participate in bringing in crops that exceed anything they have experienced in Europe. Feldwebel Rudolf Stein, working the corn harvest near Bloomington, Illinois, watches as mechanical pickers strip ears from stalks at a pace that would require dozens of hand laborers, filling trucks that transport corn to elevators where it is dried, stored, and prepared for transport to livestock feeders, food processors, or export facilities. The scale seems almost incomprehensible: single farms producing corn in quantities that would supply entire German agricultural districts, yields per acre exceeding German averages by 50% or more, efficiency that transforms agriculture from labor-intensive subsistence farming into industrial-scale food production. The winter work provides different insights as prisoners help with livestock care, equipment maintenance, and planning for the next season. Gefreiter Hans Becker, working on a cattle operation near Omaha, Nebraska, learns about American livestock breeding programs that use genetic selection and scientific nutrition to produce cattle that grow faster and larger than European breeds. The farmer, Charles Anderson, explains pedigrees, feed conversion ratios, and market grades with the precision of a scientist, approaching animal husbandry as applied genetics rather than traditional practice. Anderson's cattle receive veterinary care that would be reserved for valuable horses in Germany, including vaccinations, parasite control, and even antibiotics when needed, investments that make sense only in an economy where agricultural production generates sufficient profit to justify such expenditures. The community relationships that develop between prisoners and farm families create bonds that transcend the war in unexpected ways. Obergefreiter Ernst Fischer, working for the Thompson family near Des Moines over multiple seasons, becomes almost a member of the household, attending family dinners, helping with repairs and maintenance, teaching the Thompson children some German phrases while learning English from them. Mrs. Thompson treats him with the same matter-of-fact kindness she extends to hired hands, neither emphasizing his prisoner's status nor ignoring it, simply accepting that circumstances have brought this German soldier to work on her farm and that common decency requires treating him humanely. When Fischer receives notice of his father's death in an Allied bombing raid, the Thompsons offer genuine condolences and allow him time to grieve, a gesture of humanity that confuses all his assumptions about enemy callousness. The comparison between American and German agricultural systems becomes a frequent topic of discussion among prisoners during evening hours at camps. Feldwebel Wilhelm Koch, who worked on his family's farm in Saxony before the war, explains to fellow prisoners how American mechanization, scientific methods, and generous capital investment create productivity levels impossible under German conditions. Even before the war, German farms operated with limited mechanization, inadequate fertilizer supplies, and labor-intensive methods that barely produced adequate yields. The wartime situation, with millions of farm workers conscripted for military service, horses requisitioned for army transport, and fertilizer production diverted to explosives, has created an agricultural crisis that Nazi propaganda carefully conceals. Koch realizes that Germany is losing the war not just through military defeat but through inability to feed its population while maintaining military forces, a strategic failure rooted in agricultural inadequacy that American abundance highlights. The spring of 1945 brings a new wave of German prisoners to American farms, men captured during the final collapse of the Reich who arrive with different expectations than their predecessors. Gefreiter Peter Hartmann, assigned to a farm near Hutchinson, Kansas, comes from the Western Front where he witnessed Germany's total military disintegration, units without fuel, equipment, or adequate food, soldiers deserting by the thousands, civilians fleeing westward to escape the Soviet advance. Hartmann expects American farms to show signs of wartime strain, perhaps shortages or reduced production from years of conflict. Instead, he arrives at the Mueller farm to find spring planting proceeding with machinery, seed, and fertilizer more abundant than anything available in peacetime Germany. The cognitive dissonance proves even more severe for these late-war prisoners because they have seen Germany's collapse firsthand and cannot reconcile their nation's defeat with the effortless abundance surrounding them. The conversations between early prisoners who have worked multiple seasons and newcomers create a unique dynamic as veterans of the farm labor program try explaining what newcomers will experience. Obergefreiter Ludwig Schneider, returning for his second planting season at the Harrison farm near Bloomington, Illinois, tells newly arrived Gefreiter Thomas Weber what to expect: mechanization that seems impossible, meals containing more food than German families eat in days, farmers who treat prisoners with casual friendliness rather than hostility. Weber dismisses this as exaggeration or propaganda until his first morning when farmer John Harrison serves breakfast containing eggs, bacon, toast, orange juice, and coffee with real cream, a meal Weber initially refuses, convinced it must be intended for the family rather than a prisoner. The agricultural education that prisoners receive through direct observation proves more comprehensive than any formal curriculum could provide. Feldwebel Martin Voigt, working through an entire agricultural year at the Anderson farm near Ames, Iowa, learns crop rotation principles that maintain soil fertility, hybrid seed selection that maximizes yields, fertilizer application rates calculated through soil testing, and pest management strategies that protect crops without excessive chemical use. Anderson explains each decision in terms of economic optimization and long-term sustainability, approaching farming as a business requiring constant learning and adaptation. Voigt, whose family farm in Bavaria uses methods passed down through generations with minimal change, realizes that American agricultural success comes not just from machinery and capital but from integrating scientific knowledge into daily farming practice. The community structures supporting American agriculture reveal themselves gradually as prisoners spend months in rural areas. Obergefreiter Hans Fischer, working near Cedar Falls, Iowa, observes the network of cooperative elevators, seed suppliers, equipment dealers, agricultural extension agents, and farm bureau organizations that support individual farmers. The farmer he works for, James Peterson, participates in cooperative grain marketing, purchases inputs through farmer-owned cooperatives, and attends educational meetings organized by Iowa State College Extension Services. This infrastructure, combining competitive private enterprise with cooperative organization and public agricultural research, creates a support system that Nazi economic theory insisted was impossible, believing that only state planning could provide the coordination necessary for efficient agriculture. The relationship between American farmers and their land challenges German prisoners' understanding of agricultural economics and property rights. Gefreiter Karl Bauer, discussing land ownership with farmer Robert Mitchell near Des Moines, learns that Mitchell owns his 480 acres outright, having inherited some from his father and purchased additional land through bank financing that he is steadily paying off. Mitchell explains property taxes, mortgage payments, and the economic calculations that determine whether expanding his operation makes financial sense, treating land as capital to be managed for profit rather than as hereditary estate tied to family honor. The casual mobility of American agriculture, farmers buying and selling land based on economic opportunity, young people choosing whether to farm based on profitability rather than tradition, contradicts the blood and soil mythology that Nazi ideology made central to their worldview. The gender dynamics on American farms provide another source of confusion for prisoners raised in a society with rigid gender roles. Underoffizier Ernst Wagner, working at the Thompson farm near Mason City, Iowa, watches Mrs. Thompson handle farm finances, negotiate with grain buyers, and make business decisions with authority equal to her husband's. She drives tractors when necessary, operates equipment competently, and discusses agricultural economics with the sophistication of any farmer. The Thompsons' daughter, Mary, plans to study agricultural economics at Iowa State rather than pursuing traditional female occupations, a choice her parents support enthusiastically. This integration of women into agricultural decision-making and the assumption that daughters deserve the same educational opportunities as sons contradicts everything Nazi ideology taught about proper gender roles and female capabilities. The technological sophistication continues to reveal itself in unexpected ways as prisoners gain deeper understanding of American farming. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Koch, working on an Iowa farm equipped with electricity from the Rural Electrification Administration, discovers that farmers use electric power not just for lighting but for grain dryers, feed grinders, water pumps, and workshop tools. The farmer, David Schmidt, explains how rural electrification transformed American agriculture in the previous decade, making mechanization practical even on farms distant from cities. Schmidt discusses electricity costs and usage with the same casual familiarity that German farmers discuss hay prices, treating sophisticated infrastructure as ordinary rather than exceptional. Koch calculates that the electrical capacity available to this single Iowa farm exceeds what his entire German village can access. The food preservation and storage methods demonstrate another dimension of American agricultural sophistication. Gefreiter Otto Richter, helping Mrs. Wagner with harvest preservation near Marshalltown, Iowa, learns about pressure canning that allows safe long-term food storage, freezing technologies that preserve quality better than traditional methods, and commercial food processing that transforms agricultural products into shelf-stable goods. Mrs. Wagner's basement contains hundreds of jars of preserved vegetables, fruits, and meats, a personal food reserve that would feed a German family for months but represents merely one season's preservation work for her household. The casual assumption that individual families can maintain such reserves contradicts Nazi propaganda about American food insecurity and dependence on fragile distribution systems. The educational opportunities available to farm children force prisoners to reconsider assumptions about rural backwardness and urban superiority. Feldwebel Gustav Zimmermann, working for the Anderson family near Sioux City, discovers that the Anderson children attend a consolidated school district with modern facilities, comprehensive curricula, and resources comparable to urban schools. The oldest son plans to attend agricultural college on a scholarship, while his sister considers veterinary school, aspirations that rural German families could never reasonably entertain. The school bus that picks up farm children each morning, the assumption that rural youth deserve the same educational opportunities as urban students, and the availability of agricultural higher education accessible to working families all demonstrate social investment in rural populations that Nazi rural policies never approached despite their rhetorical celebration of peasant virtue. The farm auction in autumn 1945 provides Obergefreiter Johann Müller with unexpected insight into American agricultural economics. The retiring farmer sells equipment, livestock, and household goods through public auction where neighboring farmers bid on items they need. Müller watches a used tractor sell for more money than his father earned in 5 years of farming in Germany, observes casual bidding that treats hundreds of dollars as trivial sums, and sees equipment sold for scrap that would be prized possessions on German farms. The auctioneer's rapid-fire calling, the competitive bidding, the cash transactions, all demonstrate agricultural prosperity that makes farming economically attractive rather than merely a traditional obligation. The Thanksgiving celebration of 1945 becomes particularly poignant for prisoners who know the war has ended but cannot yet return home. Gefreiter Franz Lehmann, invited to share Thanksgiving dinner with the Peterson family near Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, experiences an American tradition that seems designed to celebrate agricultural abundance: turkey, stuffing, multiple vegetables, pies, and side dishes that transform the table into a display of rural prosperity. Mr. Peterson explains Thanksgiving's origins and its celebration of harvest bounty, unconsciously revealing American assumptions about food security and plenty that contradict everything Nazi propaganda claimed about capitalist inequality and exploitation. Lehmann realizes that this single meal, served casually to include an enemy prisoner, contains more food than his family in Germany will eat in a week. The discussion of post-war plans among American farmers reveals assumptions about the future that shock German prisoners who have experienced total defeat. Obergefreiter Heinrich Stein, listening to farmers at a community meeting near Lincoln, Nebraska, discuss plans for expansion, equipment purchases, and land acquisition, realizes these men assume continued prosperity and growth rather than post-war contraction. They debate whether to invest in new corn pickers or upgrade tractors, discuss hybrid seed varieties for next season, and plan capital improvements with confidence that agriculture will remain profitable. The absence of any expectation that defeat or economic collapse might interrupt their plans demonstrates a security and optimism incomprehensible to men from a nation facing starvation and occupation. The letters prisoners write home during 1945 and early 1946 reflect their transformed understanding while navigating censorship restrictions that prevent military information but allow personal observations. Feldwebel Carl Schmidt, writing from Camp Clarinda, Iowa, describes American farms in carefully neutral terms that still convey the fundamental message: abundance, mechanization, and prosperity that makes German agriculture seem primitive by comparison. His wife's responses describe conditions in occupied Germany that validate what Schmidt has learned. His observations of American strength are accurate, and Germany's defeat was inevitable given the disparity in productive capacity. Schmidt realizes that the cornfields of Iowa represented strategic power as important as the factories of Detroit, that Germany lost the war in part because it never understood that agricultural abundance translates directly into military capability. The repatriation process beginning in 1946 forces prisoners to confront returning to a Germany they know will be devastated while leaving farms where they have lived better than they ever did at home. Gefreiter Otto Wagner, preparing to leave the Henderson farm near Galesburg, Illinois, receives offers from farmer James Henderson to sponsor his immigration to America once post-war restrictions lift. Henderson explains the process: finding agricultural work, demonstrating good character, eventually applying for citizenship, treating immigration as a practical matter rather than an extraordinary gesture. Wagner promises to consider it while knowing he must first return to Germany to help his family survive the immediate post-war crisis, but the offer demonstrates that his American experience has created opportunities that would have been unimaginable before his captivity. The stories that former prisoners tell about their American farm experiences influenced German perceptions of America in the early Cold War years. Obergefreiter Ernst Koch, speaking to a farmers' organization in Lower Saxony in 1950, describes American mechanization, prosperity, and agricultural science in terms that help explain why Germany must look westward rather than eastward for reconstruction models. His authority comes from direct observation rather than propaganda. He worked American farms, operated their equipment, lived with their families, and saw firsthand how democratic capitalism creates agricultural abundance. Koch's testimony, combined with similar accounts from thousands of returned prisoners, helps German society understand that American prosperity is real rather than propaganda, based on genuine productive capacity rather than exploitation. The agricultural exchange programs that develop in the 1950s between West Germany and America draw on networks established through the POW farm labor program. Feldwebel Gustav Wagner, who worked Iowa farms as a prisoner, organizes a program bringing young German farmers to America for agricultural training, using connections with families who employed prisoners during the war. The program allows German farmers to learn American techniques directly while building cultural bridges between former enemies. Wagner sees this as completing a circle, transforming the forced labor of wartime into voluntary educational exchange that serves both nations' interests. The long-term impact on American farmers who employed German prisoners proves equally significant in shaping attitudes toward Germany and Germans. James Henderson, who employed Obergefreiter Kramer and later sponsored his immigration, becomes an advocate for German-American friendship in his Iowa community, challenging residual wartime hostility by pointing to the character and work ethic of the German men who worked his farm. Henderson's testimony, that Germans are hard-working, honest people betrayed by a criminal regime rather than inherently evil, helps humanize former enemies in ways that official propaganda never could achieve. The economic analysis of the POW farm labor program reveals its efficiency despite controversial aspects. The approximately 200,000 German prisoners who worked American farms during 1944 to 1946 helped harvest crops worth hundreds of millions of dollars while food production increased despite wartime labor shortages. The cost of maintaining prisoners, already required under Geneva Convention obligations, was offset by their productive labor, creating economic benefit while maintaining humanitarian standards. The program demonstrated that treating prisoners humanely need not conflict with practical utility, that Geneva Convention compliance serves both moral and economic interests. The comparative study of how different nations used prisoner labor during World War II reveals the American farm program's unique character. While Soviet and German practices involved exploitative labor that often killed prisoners through deliberate cruelty or neglect, the American program treated prisoners as workers deserving fair treatment and adequate conditions. The difference reflects fundamental values: totalitarian regimes viewing prisoners as resources to be consumed, democratic societies viewing them as human beings deserving protection even while their labor serves war needs. The outcomes: German prisoners in America gaining weight and surviving at rates exceeding those of American soldiers in combat, demonstrate that humanitarian treatment and practical utility need not conflict. The influence on agricultural policy extends beyond individual farms to shape American understanding of agriculture's strategic importance. The experience of using prisoner labor to maintain food production during wartime reinforced recognition that agricultural abundance represents national power as important as industrial capacity. This understanding influenced post-war agricultural policy, including continued support for mechanization, research funding for improved varieties and techniques, and infrastructure investment in rural electrification and transportation. The prisoners who witnessed American agricultural power inadvertently validated the strategic value of maintaining productive capacity that could feed not only America but its allies and even its enemies. The cultural exchange that occurred through the farm labor program created lasting bonds that transcended official diplomatic relations. The Christmas cards exchanged for decades between former prisoners and farm families, the occasional visits when Germans returned to see farms where they worked, the friendships maintained across continents and languages, all represent human connections formed through shared agricultural work that proved more powerful than wartime enmity. These personal relationships, multiplied across thousands of interactions, created cultural understanding that official programs could not replicate. The academic study of the POW farm labor program remains limited despite its significance, overshadowed by dramatic military campaigns and political developments. Yet the 200,000 German soldiers who worked American farms represent a substantial percentage of prisoners held in the United States, men whose direct experience of American society shaped their understanding in ways that influenced post-war Germany. Their testimony, that American prosperity was real, that mechanization and science created genuine abundance, that democratic society functioned effectively despite its freedoms, helped German society understand that reconstruction required learning from the victors rather than merely resenting defeat. The legacy of German prisoners on American farms lives on in the families descended from those who chose immigration, in the agricultural techniques exchanged between nations, and in the cultural understanding built through shared work. The story represents an overlooked chapter of World War II, a time when enemy soldiers became farm workers, when agricultural labor created unexpected education, and when the abundance of American fields delivered a message more powerful than any propaganda about the relationship between economic systems and human prosperity. For the prisoners who experienced it, those seasons working Iowa cornfields and Kansas wheat farms represented education in practical economics that shaped their understanding of why Germany lost and what Germany might learn from defeat.